1.9. Constructions of reality. In this section we explore the question of how our understanding of reality is formed and why it nevertheless so often differs from actual reality. We recognize that knowledge that has become theories can quickly be outdated or disproved. We recognize that there is no automaticity between knowledge and action, and that it is worthwhile to reflect on the reality of our lives. I introduce radical constructivism as an important frame of reference for our scientific work. A first premise of constructivism is, our own realities are not identical with the reality. We now ask ourselves the question about the reality of our reality, or rather, our realities. For all findings that have become theories and thus reality may very soon be outdated or simply disproved in the meantime. Animal food used to be considered the source of health and strength for humans. It is now clear that the consumption of meat products both promotes and even triggers so-called diseases of civilization. It is also clear that it is responsible for life-threatening antibiotic resistance, which, according to research by journalists, causes up to 40,000 deaths a year in Germany alone. See Site Online 2014, yet meat consumption has not noticeably declined at present. It has long been clear that Apple will soon present another new iPhone generation, and it is just as foreseeable that many people will again do everything they can to get their hands on one of the first devices of this kind, even though they don't actually need it and even though its production unnecessarily burdens and exploits our environment, people, animals, and resources. In both cases, it is possible to draw a conclusion from such information that might read, "Beware, harmful." But logical consequences from this information are not to be expected. Thus, there seems to be no mechanical, cause-effect relationship between acquired knowledge and resulting action. Epistemologists of the last decades have described with radical constructivism a paradigm, a frame of reference, which has become more and more significant for our scientific work. After all, we investigate realities, through analyses, interviews, interpretations, through understanding sources of different kinds. But in doing so, how can we ever ensure that we have grasped them correctly and thus arrive at valid results? We construct reality ourselves. The basic idea of constructivism is that human beings do not passively receive their environment when perceiving it, but construct their world themselves from what their senses provide them with through selection, projection, and assignment of meaning. See Porkson 2002. He thus constructs his world in an individual way, but in doing so he is shaped by social and cultural conditions. Man as a constructing, self-referential, self-contained system always knows only something about himself, but never anything about reality outside himself. The radical constructivists do not deny the existence of this reality, but they fundamentally deny man the possibility to know something about it and to know what the real reality is like. Thus, if according to the state of knowledge and the functioning of our brain we can only develop ideas about reality, but cannot directly access something like reality, see Weisgenberg in 1998-60, we have to think about the subjectivity of our realities. Absolute-oriented standards such as true or right or wrong then give way to the standard of viability, what is or was useful, helpful, successful in this situation and from this perspective. Facts have been created. At first, this constructivism seems incompatible with our traditional, ontologically oriented thinking, which always assumes that something is one way and not another. Even a sentence like "these are facts" suggests to us the irrefutable, the given, the found, corresponding to our longing for the final. A closer look at the word fact, however, turns out to indicate another dimension that is already anchored in our language. Made things would namely be the literal translation of the Latin word factum, just as the word facts also reveals that things have obviously been made by someone. Thinking about the how, not the what. Radical constructivism is an epistemology in which cognition is no longer about an objective reality, this means the what, but about the order and organization of experiences, this means the how. The epistemology of radical constructivism has faced various critiques since its emergence in the 1970s. It is a concept that understandably has both proponents and critics. Yet, recognizably, these critiques are often based on misunderstandings. Some philosophers and scientists argue that constructivism leaves no room for an external reality, claiming instead that the world is entirely constructed by human perception and thought. This view, thus described, is criticized as inadequate because it denies the existence of an independent reality and is thus unable to explain phenomena such as objective truth, falsity, and fact. However, the representatives of radical constructivism do not deny external reality per se at all, but they merely state epistemologically and, moreover, logically that we can never make definitive and sufficient statements about this reality because of our limitedness in perceiving and exploring it. Another criticism of radical constructivism relates to its epistemological assumptions. Critics complain that constructivism denies the possibility of truth by claiming that all perceptions and cognitions are constructed by the subject. As a result, they argue, it cannot provide objective knowledge and is thus unable to make statements about the world that are independent of subjective experience. In fact, this is the logical consequence of that scientifically based knowledge that people can only ever generate their own knowledge. Some critics have questioned the practicality of radical constructivism. They argue that constructivism, while an interesting theoretical concept, has no practical utility because it offers no way to gain objective knowledge about the world. Therefore, they argue, it is unsuitable as a basis for developing action strategies and decision-making processes. It can be countered that objective knowledge in the sense of eternally valid knowledge is not logically possible anyway. In this regard, reference is made to the findings of the new physics and to the approaches of systems theory. Other critics are confusing radical constructivism with social constructivism, which assumes that the perception of reality is shaped by social interactions and discourses. Critics argue that social constructivism goes beyond radical constructivism by emphasizing the importance of social factors in the construction of reality. This critique, too, seems tenuous, since it fails to appreciate the reality, which is certainly observable by everyone, that human beings have evolved as social beings and that culture, politics, society, economics, and law have emerged on this basis, i.e., all those systems with which each individual is recognizably interrelated and which influence his or her view of reality. The real difference of constructivism from ontological thinking lies in the assessment of the relationship between cognition and reality. Man can only know how he arrived at his conception of reality, but he can therefore say nothing definitive about the reality that exists outside himself. Only one's own failure says something about this reality. Whoever bumps somewhere, stumbles, gets stranded, he knows that his idea of reality did not fit there. Similarly, science speaks of the fact that a hypothesis can only be falsified, but not verified, because conditions can occur at any time that disprove a preliminary confirmation. There does not seem to be a final truth for humans. Cognition for the constructivist is not the cognition of a reality outside himself, but only the awareness of the operations of the brain, the result of which is our world of experience. This cognition is what matters to him. This is heavy fare, I know. When I myself had my first encounter with radical constructivism, the shutters went down on the inside. But the very next day they stayed up. Because I quickly understood that we, like all sentient beings, construct our own reality. Apparently, no one can get around that. Science, too, proceeds, at best, constructivistically. There is that epistemology which observes and evaluates our observation and cognition.